All right, well, joining me on the line today is John Perkins. He is the best-selling author of the classic expose Confessions of an Economic Hitman, over a year and a half on the New York Times bestseller list, and he's an economist who has enjoyed a front-row seat to world events for the past 4 decades. He's been a chief economist at a major consulting firm, an economic hitman for American corporations in the 70s, a CEO at an energy company in the 80s, and a founder of nonprofits in the 1990s and the 2000s. He spent the last 5 years traveling across the United States and many other countries where he has met with government and corporate leaders. He's spoken at universities and business conferences, and he's attempting to get a message out. His latest book is called Hoodwinked. An Economic Hitman reveals why the world financial markets imploded and what we need to do to remake them. John, it's an honor to have you on the program today. Thank you for taking time to join me.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you, Jerry. Thank you for inviting me.
John, in your latest book, Hoodwinked, you say that the current economic crisis is not a fluke. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the economic situation that we've created is a failure around the world. Less than 5% of the world's population live in the United States, and we consume more than 25% of the world's resources. That's not a model. It's a failure. It can't be repeated in Africa, India, or Latin America, or anywhere else. We need another 5 planets to repeat that around the world, and just like ours without people, that's not going to happen. So we've got to come up with something better. And this crisis, as well as global climate change, rising oceans, depleting resources that are depleting at an increasing rate, receding glaciers, all these things are pointing to the fact that we have created a situation here on our planet that's unsustainable and that we must change it.
You know, in your first book, John, your book was called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It hit the street, and people were pretty much mesmerized by what you were talking about. You were talking about some very bizarre behind-the-scenes type of economics that most people don't learn in Economics 101. And for our audience sake, I'm sure many of them are wondering, what is an economic hitman? Briefly summarize what an economic hitman is.
Yeah, I think, Jerry, it's fair to say that economic hitmen have managed to create the world's first truly global empire. And the first empire in history that's been created primarily without the military, with some obvious exceptions like Iraq and Afghanistan right now. But we work many ways, and in general, economic hitmen go in and they'll identify a country that has resources that our corporations covet, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters, but the money doesn't actually go to the country. Instead, it goes to our own corporations to build power plants or highways, industrial parks, infrastructure projects that help a few wealthy families in that country, as well as our own corporations, who are the primary beneficiaries, but don't help the majority of the people. We're too poor to buy electricity, or drive cars on the highways, or have training to do work in industrial parks that don't hire many people anyway. And yet, the citizens of the country are left holding a huge debt that they can't repay. So at some point we go back and we say, since you can't repay your debts, sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies without any environmental restrictions, or allow us to build a military plant, facility on your soil, or vote with us in a critical United Nations vote, things like that. And in a few instances when we fail, and I talk in my books about how I failed with the democratically elected president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and Omar Torrijos of Panama. When we fail, the jackals go in. They either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. Both Roldos of Ecuador and Torrijos were assassinated because we economic hitmen couldn't bring them around. In the case where the jackals fail, which doesn't happen very often, but that's what happened with Saddam Hussein in Iraq, neither the economic hitmen could corrupt Saddam Hussein, and the jackals couldn't take him out. His security was very good. He had lookalike doubles. It was hard to get at him, so they couldn't take him out. So in those sorts of cases where the jackals fail, the military goes in, as we did in Iraq and now in Afghanistan.
John, what's the relationship between the economic hitman that you're talking about and then our current financial meltdown? Is there currently a connection point today?
Absolutely. Economic hitmen have created this world that's not a model. It's a failed system. This really got underway in the 70s on an international basis, and we were spreading what I call predatory capitalism around the world. This is a form of capitalism that's relatively new, and its sole objective is to maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. And also one of its other premises is that the world really should be run by private business. Privatize schools around the world, privatize jails, even privatize the military, as we're seeing increasingly happen here in the United States. And this model we were exporting to the world in the 70s, and then it was really embraced in a big way in 1980 when Ronald Reagan became president and Margaret Thatcher of England. And they embraced Milton Friedman's principles, the Chicago School of Economics, which really cites this as the preeminent goal of business. In fact, Friedman said the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. Every president in the United States and most other countries in the world has embraced this principle since then, including both Democrats and Republicans and Obama. It's a very selfish, a very greedy way to look at the world. It's a terrible form of capitalism, I think. It's predatory, and it's creating an unsustainable and unjust world, and we really need to turn that around.
John, from your perspective, what is it going to take to change that? I mean, obviously solutions are what we're after, and you do provide some in your book, but talk about what is needed to change it.
Well, the book Hoodwinked is really devoted to that, and it's hard to go into all the detail that I go into in the book. There's a lot of detail of what every one of us can do, but to summarize, I think my main point is that we the people have to do it. We can see that to some degree, it doesn't really matter whether you have a very conservative Republican president like Bush or a liberal Democrat like Obama in the White House. It impacts certain things, but the overall picture in the global situation in the global economics and geopolitics is not changed. Only we the people can do that. And the reason that it's not changed is because politicians today don't have that much power. Even the president of the United States just doesn't have that much power. The big corporations call the shots. Nobody gets elected in the United States or any of the other so-called democracies around the world without the support of big corporations. And that includes our own president. And the big corporations control the mainstream media, either through outright ownership or advertising budgets. And they have vast armies of lobbyists. So they really are the ones calling the shots today. And I think we must understand that. But it's also important to understand that these corporations only exist because we support them. They only can prosper when we buy their goods and services. And the marketplace is essentially democratic if we choose to make it such. So when I was in college, for example, we got rid of apartheid in South Africa by refusing to patronize corporations that supported apartheid. We got corporations to clean up terribly polluted rivers because we boycotted them if they didn't, to get rid of aerosol cans with destroying the ozone layer, to open their doors wider to women and minorities. More recently, to get trans fats out of foods and antibiotics out of chickens. We have a lot of power as a consumer. The marketplace is democratic. We cast a vote every time we buy something and choose not to. And I think now we need to understand that we must take this to a new level. That rather than just going after aerosol cans or polluted rivers, both of which are important, but we need to go after the bigger picture. And that is convince corporations that we're only going to buy from the ones that are dedicated to creating a sustainable, just, and peaceful world. We're only going to buy from corporations that take our interest to heart, that are there to serve a public interest, not just there to make their executives extremely wealthy and a few of their stockholders extremely wealthy. We want to see something bigger and better from corporations.